help me get revenge. Those were the last words I ever expected to hear from my grandmother. Not because she was weak, not because she was dramatic, and definitely not because she carried bitterness like a hobby. Eleanor Whitaker was the strongest person I had ever known. At 79 years old, she still stood straighter than most people half her age. Veterans stood when she entered a room. Nurses who had worked with her decades ago still called her Lieutenant Whitaker. Neighbors brought pies at Christmas because everyone wanted a reason to knock on her door. Local officials asked her to speak at Memorial Day ceremonies. Military families called when paperwork got confusing, benefits were delayed, or grief made the world feel impossible. She had spent 24 years as a Navy nurse, and almost 30 more helping people who had already been forgotten. That was who my grandmother was. Calm, disciplined, generous. The kind of woman who could make you feel safe with one hand on your shoulder and one quiet sentence. My name is Lauren Whitaker. I am a commander in the United States Navy. At the time this happened, I had just finished a training assignment in Norfolk 3 days earlier than expected. Instead of staying on base, I drove home to Pennsylvania to surprise Grandma. I had not seen her in almost 5 months. We talked every Sunday night, but phone calls were not the same as sitting at her kitchen table while she pretended not to notice. I always took the last biscuit. Grandma had practically raised me. My parents were always busy working, busy worrying, busy saying they would come next time. Grandma was the one who showed up. She sat through my school concerts. She taught me how to drive in an empty church parking lot. She stayed beside my hospital bed when I had pneumonia at 13. And when I told her I wanted to join the Navy, she did not ask if I was sure. She only said, "Then learn to stand like your name means something." So I thought she would be happy to see me. I imagined her opening the door, laughing, pulling me into a hug, then asking whether I had eaten. Instead, when I turned onto her street, I saw my father's truck in the driveway. My mother's SUV was behind it. Uncle Dennis's old sedan sat near the curb, and behind all of them was a black Lexus I did not recognize. Nobody had mentioned a family gathering. I parked slowly, already feeling something wrong settle in my stomach. As I walked toward the porch, I heard voices through the open living room window. Not warm voices, not family voices, business voices. Then my uncle said, "If we wait another year, the house will need a roof. Sell it now before it becomes our problem." And I stopped walking. I thought I had come home to surprise my grandmother. I had actually arrived just in time to hear my family divide her life before she was even gone. My uncle's words hung in the air, and I stood on the porch like my boots had been nailed to the wood. Before it becomes our problem. That was what he had called my grandmother's home. The house where she had raised 2 sons. The house where my grandfather had died after 46 years of marriage. The house where she kept birthday cards in a shoebox. My father answered, "That's what I've been saying. Once she's in memory care, she won't need the house." Memory care. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. Grandma was old, yes. She moved slower on cold mornings. She forgot her reading glasses sometimes, usually because they were on her head. But she was not confused. She still drove herself to church. She still volunteered at the Veterans Center. She still handled her own banking. Then my mother's voice floated through the window, softer than the others, which somehow made it worse. "Her savings are just sitting there, Richard. It makes no sense. We can use what she needs for care and protect the rest for the family." Protect the rest for the family. That was the kind of sentence my mother loved. Polished enough to sound responsible. Rotten enough to tell the truth if you listened carefully. Then a woman I did not recognize spoke. "If Mrs. Whitaker signs the care transition agreement today, we can begin placement within 2 weeks. The financial authorization would allow you to coordinate asset liquidation without delays." My stomach dropped. This was not casual conversation. This was not my father worrying out loud. This was a plan. There was a stranger in my grandmother's living room discussing where to put her and how quickly they could reach what she owned. I pushed open the front door. The voices stopped instantly. My father stood near the fireplace with a folder in his hand. My mother sat straight on the sofa, like posture could make betrayal look elegant. Uncle Dennis was beside the coffee table, annoyed that the interruption had a name. and the stranger sat in a cream blazer with a leather portfolio. "Lauren," my mother said, "what are you doing here?" "Not hello, not your home, not your grandmother will be so happy. Just what are you doing here?" I looked at the coffee table. Real estate estimates, assisted living brochures, a packet labeled Care Transition Options, another folder with durable power of attorney clipped to the front. Beside it was a yellow legal pad with 3 underlined words: "Sell by winter." My father cleared his throat. "Training ended early?" I nodded slowly. "Apparently before the theft was finished." My mother's mouth opened. "That is a horrible thing to say." "What would you call it?" Uncle Dennis scoffed. "Don't start with military drama, Lauren. We're trying to make practical decisions." "For Grandma?" I asked. "Or for the house?" Nobody answered fast enough. The woman in the cream blazer stood. "Maybe I should give the family a moment." "You should," I said. My father's jaw tightened. "Where is Grandma?" Silence. Finally, my mother pointed toward the kitchen. "She's back there." I walked past them without asking permission. Behind me, Uncle Dennis muttered, "This is exactly why we didn't tell her." And that was when I knew they had not forgotten to call me. They had hoped I would arrive too late. Grandma was sitting at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug she had not touched. The kitchen smelled like coffee, lemon soap, and something burned at the bottom of the toaster. Ordinary things. Safe things. That made it worse, because nothing about her face looked safe. Her eyes were red. Her shoulders were rounded forward. A blue pen sat beside her elbow, uncapped, like someone had placed it there and waited for obedience. For 1 second, she looked confused when I stepped into the room. Then she saw me. "Lauren," that was all she said. I crossed the kitchen and wrapped my arms around her. The second I touched her, she broke down. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears against my uniform jacket. The kind that make you feel useless because there is no enemy you can punch, no order you can give, no way to put dignity back into someone's hands. I held her until her breathing steadied. Then I pulled back. "What did they do?" She glanced toward the living room. "They're worried." The word came out so flat I almost did not recognize it. "Grandma!" She gave me a tired little smile. "That is what they keep calling it." I sat across from her. "What do you call it?" For a long moment, she looked down into the coffee. Then she said, "They think I'm becoming inconvenient." My chest tightened. I had heard cruelty shouted before. But there was something worse about that sentence. It was calm. It had already hurt her before I arrived. "That's not what they said," I whispered. "No," she said, "and that's just what they meant. She told me they had been coming by more often over the last month. Not for dinner, not to sit with her. They came with brochures, questions about accounts, little comments about stairs, winter ice, loneliness, forgetfulness. Pamela had said the house felt too big for one woman. Richard had said paperwork was easier while everyone was calm. Dennis had said delaying practical decisions was selfish. Then this morning they brought that consultant. Grandma looked at this doorway. "They spoke about me like I was already gone." That was when I stood up. I was done listening to people dress greed in clean clothes and call it concern. But before I reached the doorway, Grandma's hand closed around my wrist. "Don't!" I stared at her. "They're trying to take your house." Her grip tightened. "No, sweetheart." Her sadness changed into something sharper. "They're trying to take my voice." The room went quiet. Then she leaned closer. "They don't know." I frowned. "Don't know what?" Her eyes moved toward the ceiling. "What your grandfather kept in the attic." I looked up, confused. Then she squeezed my wrist and whispered the words that made my whole body go still. "Help me get revenge." I stared at her. "Grandma, revenge?" She almost smiled. "Not the kind you're thinking." And that was when I realized she had not been waiting for rescue. She had been waiting for a witness. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood her. The attic. Grandpa's old footlocker. I had not thought about that thing in years. When I was little, it sat at the far end of the attic under a sheet, heavy and dark blue with scratched metal corners. Grandpa used to say it held Navy ghosts, which was his way of making sure I did not touch it. Now Grandma looked at me like that box might hold the only weapon she intended to use. "What's in it?" I whispered. She glanced toward the living room. "Not here." For the next 10 minutes, I played the strangest role of my military career. Not commander, not granddaughter, co-conspirator inside a house full of people pretending not to steal from an old woman. My mother's voice rose from the living room, sweet and careful, explaining to the consultant how difficult this had been on everyone. I almost laughed. Everyone. As if Grandma's humiliation was a storm the whole family had suffered equally. Then Uncle Dennis called my father outside to look at the gutters. My mother followed because she never missed a conversation where money might be mentioned. Grandma looked at me. Now, there she was. Not fragile, not confused. Lieutenant Eleanor Whitaker, retired, but still dangerous in the quietest way possible. I climbed the narrow attic stairs. The wood creaked under my boots. Dust floated in the thin light from the small window. Christmas bins leaned against boxes of tax records. At the far wall, under a faded sheet, was the footlocker. It was exactly as I remembered. Navy blue, metal latches, scratched corners. My grandfather's initials painted in white near the handle. EW had been added beneath them in smaller letters, like Grandma had claimed the box after he was gone. It was heavier than it looked. By the time I carried it down, my arms burned. Grandma waited in the hallway, listening for movement. When I set it on the kitchen floor, she touched the lid with her fingertips. For a moment, her face softened. Your grandfather always said paper remembers better than people. Then she pulled a small brass key from her cardigan pocket. The lock clicked open. I expected cash. Maybe a will. Maybe something proving my family had done this before. Something simple. Something useful. Instead, the trunk was full of a life. Letters, photographs, military records, medals wrapped in cloth, newspaper clippings, thank you cards, journals tied with string, a folded flag in a plastic case, and on top of everything, a sealed envelope with my name written across it. For Lauren, when truth is needed. I stared at it. Grandma placed her hand over mine before I could reach for it. Not yet. So we started with the photographs. The first one showed her young, standing in a Navy hospital corridor, hair pinned back, eyes sharp, uniform perfect. You were beautiful, I said. She gave me a look. Were? I smiled despite everything. Still are. Good recovery. For the first time that day, she laughed. Then I opened a letter from a sailor named Michael Reeves. He wrote that after he lost his leg, he stopped speaking, eating, and believing he would ever be a man again. Grandma visited every day. She brought newspapers, bad coffee, and orders disguised as encouragement. The last line made my throat close. If you had not believed I was still alive before I did, I would not have lived long enough to become a father. Grandma only shrugged. He did the hard part. That was when I understood. My family saw an old woman in a house they wanted to sell. The rest of the world had been saved by her. Then Grandma reached into the footlocker and pulled out a second folder. It was plain gray and tied with white string. No medals, no photographs, no beautiful handwriting on the front. Just one small label in black ink. Family assistance. I looked at her. She looked back like she already knew how much it was going to hurt. Open it, she said. So I did. The first page was a copy of a cashier's check made out to my father. $18,000. The memo line said, business recovery. I stared at the date. I remembered that year. Dad had told everyone the market had been difficult, but he had handled it. He had walked around proud for months like discipline had saved him. It had not been discipline. It had been Grandma. The next document was a bank transfer to my mother. $26,000. Medical debt. Hidden credit cards. A payment plan my mother had apparently been too embarrassed to admit existed. Underneath that was a handwritten note from Pamela. Eleanor, please do not mention this to Richard. I will pay you back by spring, I promise. There was no repayment record. I kept going. $41,000 to Uncle Dennis after his machine shop failed. $12,000 for his divorce attorney. $9,500 toward my parents' mortgage arrears. Smaller checks for car repairs, emergency taxes, tuition deposits, insurance gaps, hotel rooms, funeral flowers, and one payment labeled Dennis Payroll Rescue. Page after page, year after year, my hands started to shake. Nearly every crisis I remembered from childhood had a receipt in that folder. The year my parents almost lost the house but suddenly said things were under control. The Christmas Uncle Dennis showed up with new tires after telling everyone business was turning around. The summer mom said we could afford a beach weekend because Dad had been smart with money. Grandma had been behind all of it. And while they were taking from her, she had been living carefully, reusing foil, wearing the same winter coat for 10 years, waiting to replace the furnace until the repairman said it was no longer safe. I found one note from my father folded behind a check. "Mom, just this once, I promise I will make it right." Beneath it, in Grandma's handwriting, was one sentence. "He never did, but he is still my son." That was the sentence that broke me. Not the money, not the totals, that sentence. Because it told me Grandma had never been fooled. She knew. She had always known. She had kept loving them with her eyes open. I looked up. "Do they know how much you've done for them?" Grandma's mouth moved like she almost smiled, but nothing happy reached her face. "They used to." "Then how did they forget?" She looked toward the living room, where my father was laughing at something Uncle Dennis had said, laughing in the same house where his mother sat with proof of every time she had saved him. "People rewrite history when gratitude becomes inconvenient," she said. I closed the folder slowly. "What do you want me to do?" Grandma sat back in her chair. For a moment, she looked tired again. Then her eyes sharpened. "I do not want screaming. I do not want you marching in there and giving them the show they expect. I do not want humiliation for the sake of humiliation." "Then what do you want?" "The truth," she said. "Placed somewhere they cannot edit it." I looked at the folder, then at the sealed envelope still sitting on top of the footlocker. Grandma followed my eyes. "That," she said quietly, "is the part they will never see coming." The envelope looked too ordinary to be dangerous. Manila paper. One bent corner. My name written across the front in Grandma's careful handwriting. "For Lauren when truth is needed." I looked at her. "Grandma, what is this?" She folded her hands on the table. "Open it." So I did. Inside were legal documents, attorney letters, a medical evaluation, printed emails, and a flash drive taped to a page with a sticky note that said, "Only if they lie." For a second, I could not make the pieces fit together. Then I saw the letterhead. Clara Bennett, Estate and Elder Law. My mouth went dry. "You have a lawyer?" Grandma gave me a look. "I am old, Lauren. I am not careless." The first document created something called the Eleanor Whitaker Veterans Homefront Foundation. "The what?" "The foundation," she said. "You started a foundation?" 4 years ago. I stared at her. My parents had been walking through this house for years like they knew everything worth knowing. And for 4 years, Grandma had been quietly building something none of them had bothered to notice. The foundation's purpose was written plainly. Emergency grants for veterans. Housing help for military widows. Scholarships for service members' children. Home modifications for disabled veterans. Legal aid for seniors pressured by relatives over money, property, or care decisions. That last line made me stop. I looked up slowly. Grandma's expression did not change. "You knew this might happen." "I knew people show you who they are when they think you are too tired to stop them." There was no bitterness in her voice. That almost made it worse. I turned the page and found the updated estate plan. Most of her estate would go to the foundation after her death. The house, if sold, would fund veteran housing grants. Her savings would support emergency care, scholarships, legal aid, and the quiet help she had spent her life giving without applause. My family had been fighting over money that already had a purpose. Not hidden, not stolen, not wasted. Just placed somewhere better than their hands. Then I saw their names. Richard Whitaker, Pamela Whitaker, Dennis Whitaker. They had not been cut out completely. I almost smiled before I read the conditions. 100 verified hours of veteran community service. Financial responsibility workshops. A signed acknowledgement of Grandma's autonomy. No harassment, no pressure, no challenge to her competency. No attempt to move her, sell her property, or access her accounts without Clara Bennett present. Violation of any condition voided the gift. I looked at Grandma. "This is brilliant." She lifted one eyebrow. "It is organized." "It is revenge." "No," she said. "Grandma, it is a lesson." I laughed once, quietly, because that sounded exactly like her. She could turn an inheritance into homework and somehow make it morally impossible to argue with. Then I found the medical evaluation. 6 months earlier, a geriatric psychiatrist had written that Grandma was fully competent, fully oriented, and capable of managing her own legal and financial affairs. Behind it was a transcript from a video statement. One sentence was underlined. "If anyone claims I was confused, ask them why their concern began with the value of my house." I sat back in my chair. They were not ahead of her. They were late. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Grandma reached across the table and touched my hand. I need you to stay calm when they get cruel. That is a lot to ask. I know. Why me? Her fingers tightened around mine. Because you still get angry for the right reasons, she said. Now I need you to learn what to do with it. The next morning, my father came back with a notary. That was when Grandma began letting them bury themselves. The next morning, my father arrived at 9:07 with a mobile notary and the same calm face he used when he wanted obedience to look like reason. My mother came in behind him carrying muffins, as if sugar could soften what they were doing. Uncle Dennis followed with his phone already out. Marcy Hill, the consultant, stepped in last with a leather portfolio. Grandma sat at the kitchen table in a pale blue sweater, reading the newspaper like 4 people had not just arrived to take control of her life. Dad smiled. Mom, we thought it would be easier to handle the paperwork while everyone is here. Grandma turned one page. Easier for whom? His smile tightened. Mom set the muffins down. Please don't make this suspicious. We're your family. Grandma looked at the notary near the doorway. Then why did you bring a stranger to watch me sign papers I haven't read? The notary shifted. Marcy opened her mouth, but Grandma lifted one finger. Not yet. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because I had never seen my father corrected in his own mother's kitchen. He cleared his throat and opened the folder. This is just power of attorney language. Standard. It lets us help if something happens. Grandma folded the newspaper. Something has not happened. It could, Uncle Dennis said. That's the point. You're 79. Grandma looked at him. And you're 61. Should I bring paperwork to your house? Dennis's face went red. That's not the same. No, she said. It rarely is when the paper benefits someone else. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I wanted to ask my father whether he had practiced this. I wanted to ask my mother how many muffins it took to cover greed. Grandma's hand touched mine under the table. Observe, don't argue. That had become the order. So I stayed quiet. Dad sat across from her. Mom, the house is too much responsibility. When was the last time you asked if I wanted to leave it? He opened his mouth, then closed it. Mom stepped in. We worry about you being lonely. Grandma turned to her. Then why do you only visit with brochures? The kitchen went so still I could hear the refrigerator humming. Dennis leaned against the counter. We have to be realistic. You can't take it with you. Grandma looked at him. No, she said, but I can decide where it goes. That was the first time I saw real fear move across his face. Marcy finally spoke softly. Mrs. Whitaker, no one is trying to pressure you. Grandma glanced at the folder, the notary, the brochures, and my father's uncapped pen. Then you have chosen a strange way to be gentle. No one had an answer. A few minutes later, Grandma stood. I'm not signing anything today. Dad's voice sharpened. Mom, delaying this only makes things harder. Grandma smiled. Good. Then everyone should come to the Veterans Center this Saturday at 1 o'clock. We'll discuss my future there. My father relaxed because he thought she was giving in. Uncle Dennis nodded. Good. We can settle this like adults. Grandma looked at me. For 1 second, the old Navy nurse was gone. In her place was something colder, cleaner. Yes, she said. That is exactly what we're going to do. They thought they were walking into a signature. My grandmother was preparing a reckoning. The Veterans Center sat on the edge of town beside a row of bare winter trees and a flagpole that had probably survived more storms than most people in my family had survived honest conversations. Grandma wanted to arrive early. Of course she did. By 10:30 that Saturday morning, she was already standing in the hall with a clipboard, telling me where to place the coffee urns, which table needed the photographs, and why the medals should not be too close to the window because glare made them hard to see. You are treating this like an operation, I said. She looked at me over her glasses. It is one. The room was not fancy. Beige walls, folding chairs, old tile floor, a bulletin board covered in veteran resources, and a framed photo of a Navy hospital ship hanging near the entrance. But by noon, it had changed. The tables were covered with pieces of my grandmother's life. There were photographs from her Navy years, letters from sailors, thank you cards from widows, newspaper clippings, a picture of her standing beside a young soldier in a wheelchair, both of them smiling like victory could be quiet. Her medals rested on dark cloth near the front. Beside them sat the gray folder and the sealed documents from Clara Bennett. Clara arrived at 12:15 in a charcoal coat, carrying a leather case and the calm expression of a woman who made liars nervous for a living. Eleanor, she said, kissing Grandma's cheek, are you ready? Grandma glanced at the empty chairs. No, but I am prepared. That answer made my throat tighten. People started arriving just after noon. First a few veterans in baseball caps, then 2 nurses who had worked with Grandma 30 years earlier, then neighbors, church members, military spouses, former patients, a county commissioner, and people I did not recognize but who hugged Grandma like she had once held them together when their lives were falling apart. By 12:50, the room was nearly full. I had known my grandmother was respected. I had not understood she was loved on this scale. Then I noticed a woman near the back with a small recorder and a notebook. I leaned toward Grandma. "Is that a reporter?" Grandma did not look surprised. "Someone from the Veterans Center must have called her. Do you want me to ask her to leave?" Grandma shook her head. "Truth can survive witnesses." At exactly 1 o'clock, my father walked in with my mother and Uncle Dennis behind him. For the first half second, Dad looked relieved, like he thought this was finally the meeting where Grandma would agree to be reasonable. Then he saw the chairs, the photographs, Clara, the crowd. His face changed. Mom stopped so suddenly Uncle Dennis almost bumped into her. Her eyes moved around the room, counting people, calculating damage. "Eleanor," she whispered, "what is this?" Grandma stood beside the front table, small but steady. "People who know me?" Uncle Dennis spotted Captain Harold Price in the second row and looked away fast. Marcy Hill came in behind them, saw Clara, saw the reporter, and quietly stepped back toward the door. I almost respected the survival instinct. Dad walked up to Grandma. "Mom, this was supposed to be family." Grandma looked around the room. "It is." Then she moved to the front. The room went silent instantly. Not slowly, instantly. That kind of silence cannot be demanded. It has to be earned. Grandma placed both hands on the podium. "My family has recently become very concerned about my future," she said. "So I thought it was time we talked about my past." Then she invited the first person to speak, and with every story that followed, my family lost another place to hide. Captain Harold Price stood first. He was 82, with a cane in one hand and a navy cap tucked under his arm. The room changed when he rose, not dramatically, just enough that even my father looked up. "I met Eleanor Whitaker in a hospital room in 1974, he said. "I was 29 years old, full of infection, pride, and bad ideas." A few people smiled. Grandma did not. She watched him the way she watched everyone that day, steady, present, unafraid. Captain Price looked toward her. "I had decided I was finished, not because of the pain. Pain was simple. It was the shame. I thought I had come home less than I was." His voice caught once. "Lieutenant Whitaker came into my room every morning with terrible coffee and no patience for self-pity. She told me I could suffer and still be useful. She told me grief was not a discharge paper. She sat with me until I believed her." The room was silent. Then he turned towards my family. "So when I hear someone speaking about this woman like she is a burden, I know they have not been paying attention." My father looked down. Ruth Alvarez spoke next. She was a small woman in a purple coat holding a folded tissue she never used. Her husband had died after years of service, and the benefits paperwork nearly buried her. Grandma drove her to appointments, sat through calls, wrote letters, and corrected forms, until the government finally did what it should have done. "She never made me feel stupid," Ruth said. "That mattered. When you are grieving, people make you feel like your confusion is an inconvenience. Eleanor never did." My mother's eyes filled, but I could not tell if she was moved or embarrassed that strangers had known how to love Grandma better than she had. Then Caleb Monroe stood. He was younger, maybe late 30s, with tattoos under his sleeves and hands that shook around the microphone. "I was not easy to help," he said. "I lied. I relapsed. I cursed at people who tried. Mrs. Whitaker paid my first month in sober housing anyway." He looked at Grandma. "She told me, 'You are not your worst day unless you decide to live there.' I have been sober 6 years." People clapped then, not politely, fully. Uncle Dennis stared at the floor. Grandma thanked each speaker like they had done her a favor instead of returning pieces of her life to the room. Then she looked at me. My stomach tightened. I picked up the gray folder and walked to the front. For a second, I was 12 again, standing in a school auditorium, searching for my parents and finding Grandma instead. Then I opened the folder. "Many people here know what my grandmother has done for this community," I said. "I need my family to remember what she has done for us." My father stiffened. I read the first record, $18,000 to Richard Whitaker in 2011 after a failed business investment. "Lauren," he said quietly. I kept going. $26,000 to Pamela Whitaker for medical debt and credit cards. $41,000 to Dennis after his machine shop closed. $9,500 toward my parents' mortgage arrears. $12,000 for Dennis's divorce attorney. Smaller checks for car repairs, taxes, tuition deposits, insurance gaps, and emergencies that stopped being emergencies the second Grandma paid them. My father's face went red. That is private. I looked at him. So was pressuring Grandma to sign away her house. The room went cold. Dennis muttered she didn't have to keep records. Grandma answered before I could. I kept records because love should not require pretending. That line landed harder than shouting. My mother wiped her face. We were worried about her. I looked at the real estate estimate still clipped inside the folder. Were you worried before or after you saw what the house was worth? Nobody spoke. Then Clara Bennett stood with the estate documents in her hand, and my father's face changed before she said a single word. Clara Bennett did not rush. That was what made everyone nervous. She walked to the front with a thin stack of papers and set them beside Grandma's medals. Then she looked at my father, my mother, and Uncle Dennis the way doctors look at scans before bad news. My name is Clara Bennett, she said. I am Eleanor Whitaker's estate attorney. My father half stood. This is unnecessary. Clara turned one page. Sit down, Richard. He sat. I do not know what shocked me more, that she said it or that he obeyed. Clara continued. Mrs. Whitaker asked me to be here because conversations have taken place regarding her home, finances, future care, and legal authority. She wanted everyone to understand one thing clearly. She paused. Eleanor Whitaker is legally competent. The room went silent in a different way. Not emotional silence, legal silence. Clara lifted the first document. 6 months ago, Mrs. Whitaker completed an independent geriatric evaluation. The physician found her fully capable of managing her legal and financial affairs. Dad said, nobody said she was incompetent. Grandma looked at him. Memory care, Richard? His mouth closed. Clara lifted another paper. She has also updated her estate plan voluntarily, privately, and without pressure from any beneficiary. My father turned to Grandma. You went to a lawyer behind our backs? Grandma stayed calm. No, she said. I went to a lawyer without your permission. Those are different things. Someone near the back tried not to laugh. Clara kept going. The majority of Mrs. Whitaker's estate will fund the Eleanor Whitaker Veterans Homefront Foundation. My father blinked. What foundation? The one I created 4 years ago, Grandma said, when I realized my money could either become a family argument or a public good. The foundation will provide emergency grants, housing assistance, legal aid, and scholarships for veterans and military families, Clara said, including seniors pressured by relatives to surrender property before they are ready. That last sentence moved through the room like a blade. Uncle Dennis leaned forward. So what are you saying, we get nothing? There it was. Not, Mom, why didn't you tell us? Not, are you okay? Just what do we get? Grandma looked at him with a sadness that made him smaller. You were not erased, Dennis, but I will not reward you for counting my money while I am still drinking coffee in the next room. Clara handed copies to them. Family distributions remain available, she said, after certain conditions are met. For 1 second, all three relaxed. Then they read, 100 verified hours of veteran community service, financial responsibility workshops, assigned acknowledgement of Eleanor's legal autonomy, no harassment, no pressure regarding housing or medical care, no challenge to her competency. Any attempt to access accounts, force relocation, or contest the documents would void the gift. Uncle Dennis stared at the page. You're making us earn our own inheritance? Grandma folded her hands. No, I am giving you a chance to earn back your character. My mother started crying then. Why would you do this to your own children? Grandma's voice did not shake. Because money without character is dangerous, and I love you too much to reward what you have become. Clara opened her laptop and turned it toward the projector. There is also a video statement. My father looked suddenly afraid. On the screen, Grandma appeared in Clara's office. Her voice filled the room. If anyone claims I was confused, ask them why their concern began with the value of my house. Ask why they brought me brochures before they brought me dinner. Ask why they knew what my roof might sell for, but not what my heart had survived. No one moved. When the video ended, my father whispered, We thought we were helping. Grandma looked at him. Maybe part of you did, she said, but the part that wanted my signature was louder. That was when my mother finally said the 3 words I had waited to hear all my life. But even then, Grandma did not rush to comfort her. My mother said, "I'm sorry, Eleanor." 3 words. After all the brochures, all the careful concern, all the talk about asset liquidation, memory care, and practical decisions, that was what finally came out of her mouth. I watched Grandma's face because some childish part of me still expected her to make it easier for everyone. That was what she had always done. If someone cried, she handed them a tissue. If someone felt ashamed, she gave them a path back before they deserved one. But this time she did not move. She only looked at my mother and said, "I believe you are sorry you can see yourself clearly. That is not the same as being changed." My mother covered her mouth. The room stayed painfully quiet. Dad stood next. He looked older than he had an hour earlier. Not sick, not broken, just smaller in the way proud people look when the story they told themselves stops working. "I was scared," he said. Grandma nodded once. "Of what?" He swallowed. "Medical costs, taxes, the house, Dennis, everything getting harder. I thought if we handled it early, we were protecting you." "Were you protecting me?" Grandma asked. "Or protecting yourselves from having to ask me what I wanted?" He had no answer. That was the thing about truth. People think it needs to shout. It does not. Sometimes it just asks the one question nobody prepared for. Uncle Dennis wiped his face with both hands. "Do you think I'm a bad son?" Grandma looked at him for a long time. "No," she said. "I think you became a man who only visited his mother when he needed something. That is worse in some ways because you still know better." Dennis sat down hard. I should have felt satisfied. I had imagined this moment in sharper colors. My father embarrassed. My mother exposed. Uncle Dennis forced to sit in the same room as the truth. But standing there, I did not feel victory. I felt grief, because proof did not erase what had happened. Apologies did not unhear the words memory care. They did not remove the legal pen from Grandma's kitchen table. They did not give back the morning she spent crying alone while her children discussed her house like it was already empty. Grandma turned back to the room. "From this day forward," she said, "there will be rules. No paperwork without Clara present. No conversations about her accounts. No discussion of assisted living unless she brought it up first. No visits that turned into financial meetings. No speaking about her as if age had made her a child. And if anyone ignored those boundaries, they would not be welcomed into her home." My father nodded. My mother cried quietly. Dennis stared at the floor. Grandma looked tired then, but not defeated. That mattered. For the first time all week, the sadness on her face did not look like surrender. It looked like a woman setting something heavy down. After people began leaving, Captain Price shook her hand. Ruth hugged her. Caleb whispered something that made her smile. Clara packed her documents without drama. Only our family remained near the front. Nobody knew what to say. Finally, Grandma reached for her cane and stood. "I love you," she said to her children. "But love is not permission." That was when I understood. The revenge was not watching them suffer. The revenge was watching the lie stop working. After that day, my family did not magically heal. People like to imagine truth walks into a room, fixes every crooked thing, and sends everyone home better. That is not how it happened. My father still got defensive. My mother still cried when boundaries did not bend for her. Uncle Dennis still complained about the financial workshops like someone had sentenced him to basic adulthood. But the old system was broken. That mattered. Dad started volunteering at the Veterans Center every Thursday morning. At first, he looked awkward holding coffee trays like they might explode. Grandma never praised him too quickly. She watched. Anyone can behave for an audience. Character is what stays when nobody claps. My mother began delivering meals to elderly widows twice a month. The first time, she posted about it online. Grandma called her and said, "Service does not need a caption, Pamela." Mom deleted the post. Uncle Dennis kept going to the financial classes, though he complained every week. Grandma said, "Humility is overdue interest." I returned to duty 3 weeks later. I called her almost every night. Sometimes we talked about the foundation, sometimes about my ship schedule. Sometimes neither of us said much and the silence still felt like home. Almost a year later, her body started getting tired, not her mind. Never that. But her hand shook more. Stares took longer. Her voice got softer in the evenings. Grandma could accept death better than dependence, which is probably why she fought so hard to keep her choices while she still could. I came home on leave in early spring. We sat on her porch under a gray sky, wrapped in blankets, even though she insisted it was not that cold. The garden had not bloomed yet. The old maple tree was bare, but the buds were there if you looked closely. Grandma looked at me and said, "Do you remember what I asked you that day?" I smiled. "Help me get revenge." She made a face. Terrible wording. Effective, though. That made her laugh. Tired but real. "I did not want revenge," she said. "Not really. I wanted them to stop making me disappear while pretending it was love." She reached for my hand. "People will hurt you, Lauren. Sometimes they will betray you while using the language of family. But the question is not only what they did, the question is who you become afterward." My throat tightened. She squeezed my hand. "Do not become cruel just because cruelty would be understandable." 3 months later, Grandma died in her sleep. Peacefully, they said. I have always hated that word a little. It makes loss sound neat. There was nothing neat about walking into that house and knowing the person who made it feel alive would never call from the kitchen again. Her funeral filled the church. Veterans came in uniform. Nurses came with old photographs. Widows brought casseroles. My father volunteered at the service without being asked. My mother sat quietly. No performance. Uncle Dennis cried openly. The foundation launched its first grant 6 weeks later. A ramp for a disabled veteran. Emergency rent for a military widow. Legal aid for an 81-year-old man whose nephews were trying to force him to sell his farm. That one made me sit in my car and cry, because Grandma was still protecting people. So if you have ever watched the kindest person in your family get treated like a burden, I need you to hear me clearly. Age does not erase personhood. Help does not become ownership. And concern is not concern if it only appears near money. You are not cruel for protecting someone's dignity. You are not dramatic for refusing to let truth be buried. Sometimes the strongest revenge is not destroying people back. Sometimes it is letting the truth stand in a room full of witnesses. My grandmother did not ask me to help her become cruel. She asked me to help her remain herself while the truth did what anger never could. The revenge was never the house. It was never the money. It was the moment they finally had to see her as a person again. So, tell me honestly, if your family tried to take control of someone who had spent their whole life taking care of everyone else, would you stay quiet to keep the peace? Or would you help the truth walk into the room?